The large silver spaceship hung in the sky above New York City. It had been there for 3 days now. People stood in streets looking up with open mouths. Some were scared, others were excited. But everyone knew that the world had changed forever. Captain James Wilson stood on the roof of the United Nations building. He adjusted his blue military uniform and took a deep breath. As the head of the United Earth Defense Force's first contact team, he had trained for this moment for years. But no training could fully prepare anyone for meeting aliens. "They're landing, sir," said Lieutenant Parker, pointing to the bottom of the ship. Wilson nodded and watched as a small craft separated from the main ship and descended toward the special landing pad that had been built in the plaza. His earpiece crackled. "Remember, Captain," said General Hayes from Command Headquarters, "observe and report. Show them respect but protect Earth's interests. We're counting on you." "Understood, sir," Wilson replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. The landing craft touched down without a sound. It was smooth and oval-shaped, with no visible engines or windows. A door appeared in its side, sliding open to reveal a ramp. Wilson stepped forward with 5 other representatives who had been chosen for this historic meeting. 3 tall figures walked down the ramp. They had blue-gray skin that seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. Their eyes were large and purple, set in faces that looked almost human but not quite. They wore what appeared to be armor, though it moved like cloth. The tallest alien stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Trell of the Valari Confederation," he said in perfect English. Their translation technology had obviously been studying Earth's broadcasts. "We come in peace and wish to establish relations with your world." Wilson stepped forward. "I am Captain James Wilson of the United Earth Defense Force. On behalf of humanity, I welcome you to Earth." Ambassador Trell nodded. "This is my military advisor, Commander Korak," he said, gesturing to a stockier alien with dark markings on his face. "And our science officer, Mira." Korak looked at Wilson with what seemed like amusement. His eyes moved over Wilson's uniform, lingering on the sidearm at his hip. "You still carry physical weapons?" Korak asked, his voice containing a note of surprise. Wilson nodded. "Yes, this is standard for military personnel." Korak made a sound that might have been a laugh. He turned and said something to Trell in their language. The following days were filled with meetings and discussions. The Valari seemed peaceful enough. They talked about trade, cultural exchange, and sharing of some technologies. But whenever military matters came up, Korak showed the same dismissive attitude. 1 week after first contact, Wilson was invited aboard the Valari mothership for a tour. He brought along Major Diana Foster, his weapons specialist, and Dr. Mark Thompson, Earth's leading physicist. The inside of the ship was incredible. Corridors seemed to be made of flowing metal that changed color as they walked. Rooms appeared and disappeared as needed. The Valari were clearly hundreds of years ahead of humans in technology. "And this," said Trell proudly as they entered a large room, "is our defensive systems center." The room was filled with holographic displays showing the ship and its systems. Korak stood near a control panel watching the humans with those same amused eyes. "Perhaps," Korak said, "you would like to see some of our weapons technology, since your people seem so interested in such things." Wilson nodded. "We would appreciate that, yes." Korak pressed a few symbols on the panel. A section of the wall disappeared, revealing a window that looked out onto a large chamber. Inside were various objects, furniture, metal plates, and what looked like targets. "Observe," Korak said. He spoke a command, and a small drone flew into the chamber. It hovered and then fired a beam of blue light at one of the metal plates. The plate didn't just melt, it completely disappeared. "Molecular disintegration," Korak explained. "The target's atomic bonds are broken instantly. No debris, no radiation, no mess." Dr. Thompson's eyes widened. "Impressive," he said quietly. Korak seemed pleased by their reaction. "And now our defensive technology." He pressed another symbol and a force field appeared around one of the targets. Our shields operate on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Nothing can penetrate them. Energy weapons are absorbed and physical objects are repelled. To demonstrate, he sent another drone to fire at the shielded target. The blue beam hit the shield and dissipated harmlessly. "What about kinetic weapons?" Major Foster asked. "Like our bullets or missiles?" Korak made that laughing sound again. Such primitive weapons would be even less effective. He spoke another command, and the drone fired a small metal projectile at high speed toward the shield. The projectile hit the shield and bounced off as if it had hit a solid wall. "You see," Korak said, "your weapons technology is, how do you say it, obsolete. We moved beyond physical projectiles centuries ago." Wilson noticed something, though. The shield had flickered slightly when the projectile hit it, just for a split second. He caught Major Foster's eye, and he could tell she had seen it too. "Would you like to show us your weapons now, Captain?" Korak asked, his tone making it clear what he thought of Earth's technology. "Of course," Wilson said evenly. "We've arranged a demonstration at our military base tomorrow if you'd care to attend." Korak nodded. "We look forward to it." The next day, at a remote military testing ground, Wilson led the Valari delegation past various Earth weapons. They saw tanks, fighter jets, and missile systems. With each display, Korak and the other Valari seemed less impressed. "And these are your most advanced weapons?" Korak asked, as they watched a demonstration of a new laser-guided missile. "Some of them," Wilson replied carefully. "We have others that are classified." Korak made a dismissive gesture. "There is nothing in your arsenal that would concern us. Your weapons are based on chemical explosions and physical impacts. They are, what is your word? Crude." Wilson kept his face neutral, but he noticed something important. Throughout the tour, he had observed that the Valari wore no physical armor. They relied entirely on their energy shields, and those shields seemed to be calibrated primarily against energy weapons like their own. Later, back at command headquarters, Wilson met with General Hayes and his team. "They're overconfident," Wilson reported. "They've evolved beyond physical weapons and defenses. Their shields are designed to stop energy attacks like their own weapons, but they seem less effective against simple kinetic impacts." "You think their shields have a weakness?" General Hayes asked. "I think they've forgotten the basics," Wilson said. "They've advanced so far that they've left themselves vulnerable to simpler approaches. Their shields flickered when hit by their demonstration projectile. It was small and fired at a predictable speed. What would happen if we hit them with something bigger, or something moving at a different velocity than they're used to?" "Like a bullet?" Major Foster suggested. "Or a tank shell," Wilson nodded. "They laughed at our primitive weapons, but they might be our best chance if things go bad." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," General Hayes said. "But start working up some options. I don't like how dismissive they are of us. People who underestimate others often have bad intentions." Wilson nodded. As he left the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that despite the Valari's friendly words, trouble was coming. And when it did, humanity's primitive weapons might just wipe the smug looks off their alien faces. He just hoped they wouldn't have to find out who was right. 6 months had passed since the Valari arrived on Earth. What began as a hopeful first contact had slowly turned into something less friendly. Captain James Wilson sat in his office at the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, reading reports from around the world. None of them were good. The Valari had established bases in 12 locations across the planet. They called them cultural exchange centers, but Wilson had his doubts. A knock came at his door. "Enter," Wilson said, looking up from his tablet. Major Diana Foster walked in. Her face was serious. "You need to see this, sir," she said, handing him a new tablet. Wilson took it and studied the screen. It showed satellite images of the Valari base in Brazil. Large machines were digging into the ground. "When were these taken?" Wilson asked. "This morning," Foster replied. "They're extracting rare minerals without permission from the Brazilian government." Wilson frowned. This wasn't the first time. In the past month, the Valari had begun taking Earth resources without asking. When questioned, They simply said it was part of the mutual benefits of their presence on Earth. "Have you shown this to General Hayes?" Wilson asked. "Yes, sir. He wants you to bring it up at today's meeting with Ambassador Trell." Wilson nodded. "I'll handle it." 2 hours later, Wilson sat at a large table in the UN building. Across from him were Ambassador Trell and Commander Korak. Several human officials from different countries were also present. "We've discovered your mining operation in Brazil," Wilson said, placing the images on the table. "The Brazilian government never approved this." Korak looked at the images with bored eyes. "We need these minerals," he said simply. "Then you need to ask permission and offer fair payment," said the Brazilian representative. Trell waved his hand. "We are providing your world with many benefits. Our presence here brings you advanced knowledge. The minerals are small compensation." "That's not how things work on Earth," Wilson said firmly. "You can't just take what you want." Korak's purple eyes fixed on Wilson. "Your world has abundant resources that you waste. We are simply being efficient. Those resources belong to the people of Earth," Wilson insisted. Korak stood up suddenly. "You should be grateful," he said, his voice cold. "Many species would be conquered outright. We offer partnership." The room fell silent. It was the first time any of the Valari had mentioned conquest. After the meeting, Wilson walked with Dr. Anna Miller, the lead scientist assigned to study Valari technology. "They're becoming more aggressive," Wilson said. "I don't like it." Dr. Miller nodded. "I've been studying the data from their weapons demonstration. I think I found something interesting." They entered her lab, where various screens displayed test results and simulations. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a video of the Valari shield test. "Watch carefully when the projectile hits the shield." Wilson watched as the recording played in slow motion. The shield flickered slightly at the point of impact. "Their shields are energy-based," Dr. Miller explained. "They're designed to stop energy weapons and high-velocity objects, but they tune the shields to specific threat levels." "Meaning what?" Wilson asked. "Meaning they might be vulnerable to certain kinds of physical attacks," she said, "especially ones they don't expect or haven't prepared for." Wilson thought about this. "Can we test your theory?" Dr. Miller smiled. "I've already started. We've been firing different projectiles at a sample of their shield technology." She showed him another screen. It displayed test results of various weapons fired at a small shield generator the Valari had given them as a gift. "Most modern weapons don't work," she said. "The fast bullets from our newest guns get stopped, but look at this." She played a video of an old revolver firing at the shield. The bullet, slower and heavier than modern ammunition, passed through the shield at half speed but made it through. "They've forgotten about simple physics," Dr. Miller said. "Their shields are tuned for high-energy impacts. Slower, heavier objects still have enough mass to be dangerous but don't trigger the shield's full strength." Wilson stared at the screen. "Keep this quiet," he ordered. "And keep testing. Find out exactly what works and what doesn't." Over the next few weeks, tensions continued to rise. The Valari established more mining operations. When governments protested, the aliens simply ignored them. Then came the incident that changed everything. Wilson was called to an emergency meeting at 3 a.m. When he arrived, General Hayes and the Joint Chiefs of Staff were already there, their faces grim. "What happened?" Wilson asked. General Hayes pointed to the main screen. It showed a satellite view of the Pacific Ocean. A small dot was missing. "The Japanese weather satellite," Hayes explained. "The Valari destroyed it an hour ago." Wilson zaned up. Blood ran cold. "Why?" "They claim it was spying on one of their ships," said Admiral Lee. "It wasn't. It was a civilian weather satellite." "They're testing us," Wilson said, "seeing how we'll respond." The room was silent for a moment. "We need to show strength," General Hayes finally said. "The President has called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council. They're voting on issuing an ultimatum to the Valari." 3 days later, Wilson found himself once again preparing to board a Valari ship. But this time his mission wasn't friendly. In his hand was an official document from the United Earth Council. "Be careful up there," Dr. Miller told him before he left. "I don't trust them, especially Korak." Wilson nodded. "Neither do I." He had a small pistol hidden under his jacket. Not his standard military sidearm, but an old model revolver with heavy bullets. The kind Dr. Miller had discovered could penetrate Valari shields. The Valari shuttle took Wilson up to their mothership. He was escorted to a meeting room where Ambassador Trell and Commander Korak waited. "Captain Wilson," Trell said, his voice not as friendly as it once was. "What brings you here today?" Wilson placed the document on the table. "An ultimatum from the United Earth Council. You will stop taking our resources without permission. You will respect our sovereignty. And you will pay for the satellite you destroyed." Korak picked up the document and looked at it. Then he laughed and dropped it back on the table. "Or what?" he asked. "What will you do with your primitive weapons and technology?" "We will defend ourselves," Wilson said firmly. Korak leaned forward. "Let me explain something to you, Captain. We have been patient with your species, but our patience has limits." "So does ours," Wilson replied. "Perhaps," Korak said, his voice suddenly dangerous, "we should make an example, to show your people the true power of the Valari." Wilson felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "A small demonstration," Korak said. "Perhaps one of your cities. Nothing too large. Madrid might be suitable." Wilson stood up quickly. "That would be an act of war." "It would be a lesson," Korak corrected. "One your primitive species needs to learn." Wilson turned to leave. "I need to report this threat to Earth immediately." "I think not," Korak said. 2 Valari guards moved to block the door. "You will remain here while we decide how to respond to this ultimatum." Wilson realized he was being detained. His hand moved slowly toward his hidden weapon. If the Valari were planning to attack Earth, he needed to warn everyone. And he was beginning to think that Dr. Miller's discovery about their shields might be humanity's only hope. Captain James Wilson stood very still as the 2 Valari guards blocked his way to the door. His hand rested near his hidden revolver, but he didn't draw it yet. He needed to think carefully. "Commander Korak," Wilson said, keeping his voice calm, "detaining an official representative is against all diplomatic rules." Korak made that now familiar sound that passed for laughter among the Valari. "Rules? You speak of rules while threatening us with your ultimatum?" "It's not a threat," Wilson replied. "It's a request for respect." Ambassador Trell stepped forward. "Perhaps we should all calm down. Captain Wilson, please take a seat. We can discuss this matter further." Wilson didn't move. "I need to report. Back to Earth. Now." "After we finish our discussion," Korak insisted. The guards moved closer. Wilson quickly assessed his situation. The room had one main door, currently blocked by the guards. There was another smaller door that likely led to another part of the ship. The meeting table stood between him and the aliens. If he had to fight, he would be outnumbered. "Very well," Wilson said, pretending to give in. "Let's talk more." He slowly moved back toward the table, his mind racing. As he passed by a chair, he suddenly grabbed it and threw it at the nearest guard. The guard stumbled back, surprised by the primitive physical attack. Wilson used that moment to pull out his revolver. The Valari in the room froze, looking at the weapon with confusion rather than fear. They had never seen an old Earth gun before. "What is that primitive thing?" Korak asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. "Something old," Wilson replied. "Something you forgot about." He aimed at the wall near the guards and fired. The loud bang of the revolver shocked the Valari, who were used to the silent energy weapons of their own culture. The bullet hit the wall, leaving a small hole. The guards looked at it in surprise. Then they activated their personal shields, shimmering energy fields that surrounded their bodies. "Your primitive weapon cannot harm us." "Through our shields," Korak said, starting to sound amused again. "Surrender now." Wilson didn't answer. Instead, he aimed directly at one of the guards and fired again. What happened next changed everything. The bullet passed through the guard's shield as if it wasn't there. The guard fell to the ground, wounded. Everyone in the room, human and alien, stared in shock. "Impossible," Korak shouted. Wilson didn't waste time explaining. He fired at the second guard, who also fell. Then he aimed the gun at Korak. "The shield frequency," Wilson said. "You never calibrated it for slow-moving projectiles, did you? You forgot about simple bullets because they seemed too primitive to be a threat." Korak's face showed a mix of anger and fear. "This is an outrage, an unprovoked attack." "You just threatened to destroy Madrid," Wilson reminded him. "And you're holding me prisoner. I'd say that provoked me plenty." Ambassador Trell raised his hands. "Captain, please, this is all a misunderstanding." "No," Wilson said firmly. "It's very clear. You came to Earth thinking we were primitive and weak. You took what you wanted, and when we stood up for ourselves, you threatened us." He kept his gun aimed at Korak while moving toward the smaller door. "I'm leaving now. I need to warn Earth about your plans." "You'll never escape the ship," Korak warned. "Watch me," Wilson replied. He backed through the small door which led to a corridor. Once through, he shut the door and used his gun to shoot the control panel beside it. Sparks flew, and the door locked shut. Alarms began to sound throughout the ship. Wilson ran down the corridor, trying to remember the layout from his previous visits. He needed to find an escape pod or shuttle. 2 more Valari appeared around a corner. They raised their energy weapons, but Wilson fired first. His bullets went straight through their shields, and they fell. "Security breach in Section 4. A voice announced over the ship's communication system. "Human intruder armed with kinetic weapons." Wilson smiled grimly. They were finally calling his revolver what it was. A kinetic weapon. Not primitive, not obsolete, just different from what they had expected. He rounded another corner and found what he was looking for. A small shuttle bay. 2 small Valari craft sat ready for use, but 3 guards stood between Wilson and the shuttles. "Stop right there, human," one of them ordered. Wilson took cover behind a storage container as they fired their energy weapons. The container melted, where their beams hit it. Wilson popped up and fired back, hitting 1 guard. The other 2 activated stronger shields. These ones glowed brighter than the personal shields he'd seen before. He fired at them. But this time, the bullets slowed down more before breaking through. These shields were partially effective, just not completely. 1 guard was hit in the leg, while the other avoided the shot. The remaining guard fired again, nearly hitting Wilson. He needed to end this quickly. Looking around, he spotted a control panel on the wall. He aimed carefully and shot it. The panel exploded in sparks, and the lights in the shuttle bay flickered. The guard was distracted for just a moment, but that was all Wilson needed. He fired 1 more shot, and the guard went down. Breathing hard, Wilson ran to the nearest shuttle. Thankfully, the Valari controls were intuitive, designed to be used by any species. He had received basic training on operating their smaller vessels during the early days of cultural exchange. The shuttle came to life under his hands. The bay doors were closed, but Wilson found the weapon controls. He fired the shuttle's energy beam at the doors, cutting a hole large enough to fly through. As he guided the shuttle out of the Valari mothership, he could see other ships beginning to pursue him. But the small shuttle was fast, and he pushed it to full speed toward Earth. "This is Captain Wilson to Earth Defense Command," he said into the communication system. "Emergency situation. The Valari are hostile and planning an attack. I repeat, the Valari are planning an attack." He looked back at the mothership growing smaller behind him. "But I've discovered something important. Their shields don't stop conventional bullets, especially from older weapons. They're vulnerable to our primitive technology." "Captain, this is General Hayes," came the reply. "Return to base immediately. We need all the information you have." "On my way, sir," Wilson replied. "But you should know, I fired the first shots. I had to fight my way out. They'll consider this an act of war." There was a brief silence. Then Hayes said, "Understood, Captain. You did what you had to do." As Wilson piloted the shuttle toward Earth, he could already see Valari ships changing position above the planet. The mothership was turning, moving, into what looked like an attack formation. And sir, Wilson added, tell Dr. Miller she was right. Our old weapons work against their shields. That might be our only advantage in what's coming. War, General Hayes said grimly. Yes, sir, Wilson agreed. War. Behind him, the Valari ships began to move. The aliens who had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons were about to discover just how effective those weapons could be. The war began with fire raining from the sky. 3 hours after Captain Wilson returned to Earth, the Valari ships moved into attack position. Their energy weapons lit up the night sky as they fired at military bases around the world. Buildings exploded into dust. Runways melted. Modern fighter jets turned to ash before they could even take off. In the underground command center of the United Earth Defense Force, General Hayes watched the destruction on multiple screens. Status report, he demanded. We've lost bases in Germany, Japan, and Egypt, an officer reported. The Valari are targeting our air defenses first. Captain Wilson stood nearby, watching grimly. He had barely made it back to Earth before the attack began. They want to take out our advanced weapons, Wilson said. They still think those are the only threat. Then they're still underestimating us, General Hayes replied. He turned to his communications officer. Send the order. Operation Throwback is now active. All around the world, hidden bunkers opened. Inside were weapons that most military leaders had considered outdated years ago. Old tanks, artillery, even World War II-era machine guns. Weapons that had been kept as museum pieces or for training. Now they would serve again. Dr. Anna Miller rushed into the command center carrying a tablet. Captain Wilson was right, she said breathlessly. We've analyzed his footage from the Valari ship. Their shields can't stop slower kinetic weapons effectively, but we've made improvements. She showed them diagrams of new ammunition. We've modified bullets to be even more effective against their shields. Lower velocity, higher mass. We're sending the specifications to all manufacturing centers now. General Hayes nodded. Good work, Doctor. How quickly can we produce enough? We've already started. The design is simple enough that even small factories can make them. On another screen, they could see Valari ships entering Earth's atmosphere. The ships were heading toward major cities. They're moving in for ground attacks, Wilson said. They think they've disabled our defenses. Colonel Reed's forces are in position, an officer reported. General Hayes nodded. Tell him to proceed. Near the coast of California, Valari landing craft descended toward what they thought was an undefended beach. Their scans showed no active defense systems or energy signatures. To them, the area appeared abandoned. What they didn't detect were the old diesel-powered submarines hiding underwater just offshore. These submarines had been outdated for years, replaced by nuclear vessels. But their old engines didn't emit the energy signatures that Valari sensors were designed to detect. Colonel Thomas Reed stood on the bridge of the USS Greyback, a submarine recommissioned for this very purpose. All tubes loaded with modified torpedoes, his weapons officer reported. Fire when they're in range, Reed ordered. As the Valari ships lowered toward the beach, the submarines launched their torpedoes. The old weapons, modified with Dr. Miller's specifications, sped through the water. The Valari detected them too late. Their shields, designed to stop energy, weapons and high-velocity projectiles, failed against the slower but massive torpedoes. Explosions rocked the alien ships, sending several crashing into the ocean. Similar scenes played out around the world. In Europe, old artillery hidden in forests fired at Valari ships. In Asia, tanks thought too old for modern warfare emerged from hiding places to engage alien ground forces. The Valari were confused and shocked. Their superior technology was being defeated by weapons they had dismissed as primitive. Back at TU Command Center, reports of victories began to come in. Colonel Reed reports successful engagement off the California coast. 5 Valari landing craft destroyed, an officer announced. Tank divisions in Ukraine have engaged and destroyed Valari. Ground forces, reported another. Wilson allowed himself a small smile. They weren't ready for this. No, General Hayes agreed. But they'll adapt. We need to press our advantage while we still have it. Dr. Miller was working furiously at a computer. The Valari will try to recalibrate their shields to stop our kinetic weapons. We need to stay ahead of them. How? Wilson asked. By being unpredictable, she replied. We need to keep changing our approach. Different speeds, different masses, different attack. Vectors. General Hayes nodded. We've held them off for now, but they still have the advantage in space. We need to take the fight to them. I have an idea about that, Wilson said. For 3 days, the battle raged across Earth. The Valari continued their attacks, but they met resistance at every turn. Human forces used weapons and tactics that confused the aliens. Old propeller planes approached from low altitudes, hidden from advanced sensors designed to detect jet engines. Mechanical weapons without electronic components couldn't be disabled by Valari jamming signals. Supreme Admiral Vex, commander of the Valari fleet, was furious. He had expected an easy victory. Instead, his forces were suffering heavy losses. How is this possible? He demanded of his officers aboard the Valari flagship. They are using antiques against our advanced technology. Their weapons are unexpected, one officer admitted. Our shields were not configured for such primitive attacks. Then reconfigure them, Vex shouted. I want all ships to update their shield frequencies immediately. We are trying, Supreme Admiral, another officer said. But they keep changing their weapons. When we adjust for one type, they switch to another. Vex slammed his fist on a control panel. These humans are more resourceful than we anticipated. On Earth, Wilson was briefing a group of pilots. These weren't modern fighter pilots, but crop dusters, stunt flyers, and hobbyists who flew old planes that used minimal electronics. Your planes won't be detected by their sensors, Wilson explained. You'll deliver these specially designed bombs directly to their ships when they come into the atmosphere. A woman raised her hand. Won't their weapons shoot us down? Their weapons are designed to track modern aircraft, Wilson replied. Your old planes are essentially invisible to them. By the time they see you visually, you'll have already dropped your payload. All across Earth, similar briefings were happening. Regular citizens with hunting rifles were being taught how their simple weapons could harm the aliens. Car mechanics were modifying vehicles into weapons carriers. Earth was mobilizing in ways the Valari had never imagined. In a secure facility, Dr. Miller and her team worked on the next phase of the plan. The cargo ships are ready, she told Wilson and General Hayes. We've stripped them of all electronics and installed manually operated weapon systems. Good, Hayes said. When can they launch? Tomorrow, Miller replied. We've equipped them with modified nuclear warheads that should penetrate the Valari mothership's shields. What about the crews? Wilson asked. They're all volunteers, Hayes said solemnly. They understand the risk. Wilson nodded. Earth was fighting for its survival and sacrifices would have to be made. The next day, 12 cargo ships lifted off from various locations around the world. They had been modified to reach space using old rocket technology. No computers, no advanced guidance systems, just brave pilots making manual calculations. As they approached the Valari fleet in orbit, the alien ships initially ignored them. Their sensors registered the cargo ships as debris or primitive vehicles of no threat. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. The cargo ships deployed their weapons, simple nuclear warheads modified to travel at unusual speeds that the Valari shields weren't calibrated for. 3 of them struck the flagship directly. Supreme Admiral Vex watched in horror as alarms blared throughout his ship. Sections were being destroyed by what his officers had assured him were harmless human vessels. Retreat, he ordered. All ships pull back and regroup. For the first time since the war began, the Valari fleet withdrew from Earth orbit. They needed time to reassess their strategy against an enemy that fought like no other they had encountered before. On Earth, people watched as the alien ships pulled away. It wasn't victory yet, but it was hope. They'll be back, General Hayes said as he watched the ships retreat. Yes, Wilson agreed, but now they know we're not as primitive as they thought, and will be ready for round 2. 3 months after the war began, Earth had become a different place. Cities bore the scars of Valari attacks. Regular people had become soldiers, and the United Earth Defense Force had transformed into a powerful fighting machine that combined old and new technologies in ways the Valari still struggled to counter. Captain James Wilson, now promoted to admiral, stood in the main control room of the newly completed space defense platform. Around him, technicians prepared for humanity's boldest move yet. "Operation Thunderbolt is ready to launch, Admiral," reported Colonel Thomas Reed, who had become Wilson's second-in-command after his success with the submarine attacks. Wilson nodded. "Show me the fleet." A large screen displayed Earth's assembled Space Forces. 20 converted cargo ships had been fitted with railguns, simple weapons that used magnetism to fire metal projectiles at high speed. The ships looked ugly and crude compared to the sleek Valari vessels, but they were deadly effective. Behind them were another 30 ships carrying nuclear missiles specifically designed to defeat Valari shields. These weren't the elegant spacecraft from science fiction movies. They were blocky, practical vessels built for one purpose: to take the fight to the enemy. "All ships report ready, sir," Reed said. Wilson took a deep breath. "Send the order. Operation Thunderbolt begins now." Throughout, the fleet captains received their orders, engines fired, and Earth's makeshift navy moved toward the Valari fleet, which had regrouped behind the moon. On the Valari flagship, Supreme Admiral Vex received the alert. "Human vessels approaching," an officer reported. "They appear to be modified transport ships." Vex studied the images with narrowed eyes. The humans had surprised him once. He would not underestimate them again. "They've strengthened their shields," he said. "Our science division has studied their primitive weapons and recalibrated our defenses. They won't penetrate so easily this time." "Should we engage, Supreme Admiral?" asked his second-in-command. "Yes," Vex decided, "but cautiously. Send the third battle group to intercept them." The Valari ships moved forward, their weapons ready. They had learned from their earlier defeats and had modified their sensors to detect the old-style engines and weapons the humans were using. What they didn't expect was for the humans to have adapted too. As the Valari ships approached, the human vessels suddenly changed formation. Hidden compartments opened, revealing weapons the Valari had never seen before. "What are those?" Vex demanded as the images came through. "Unknown, Supreme Admiral," his officer replied. "They appear to be primitive projectile launchers, but larger than any we've encountered." The human ships fired their railguns, massive metal slugs, some weighing several tons, shot toward the Valari vessels. The aliens' shields, recalibrated to stop the smaller projectiles from earlier battles, couldn't handle the sheer mass of these new weapons. 3 Valari ships were hit directly. Their shields flared and failed, and the metal slugs tore through their hulls. "Impossible," Vex shouted. "They're using even more primitive technology." "They've increased the mass and decreased the velocity," his science officer explained. "Our new shield configurations weren't designed for such heavy objects." Vex slammed his fist on his command chair. "Recalibrate again. All ships. Adjust shields for maximum mass resistance." The Valari fleet scrambled to adapt. Their ships began to change their shield frequencies, preparing for the heavy projectiles, but Admiral Wilson had anticipated this. "Phase 2, he ordered, over the communication system. The second wave of human ships now fired their weapons, but instead of heavy slugs they launched thousands of small metal balls, similar to shotgun pellets but designed for space combat. The tiny projectiles moved at much higher speeds than the slugs, easily penetrating the Valari shields that had just been recalibrated for heavy, slow objects. More Valari ships suffered damage as the small projectiles shredded their external systems. "They're changing tactics faster than we can adapt," Vex's second-in-command cried. Vex saw his advantage slipping away. "All ships forward. Use energy weapons at maximum power. Destroy them before they can fire again." The Valari fleet surged forward, firing their disintegration beams at the human ships. Several human vessels were hit, turning instantly to dust. But the humans had prepared for this too. The remaining ships split into smaller groups, making it harder for the Valari to target them all. And they kept changing weapons, sometimes firing heavy projectiles, sometimes light ones, sometimes at high speed. sometimes at low speed. The Valari shields couldn't be recalibrated fast enough to stop all these different attacks. Ship after ship took damage. On the space defense platform, Wilson watched the battle unfold. "They're confused," he said to Reed. "Their technology is so advanced that they never needed to develop tactical flexibility. They don't know how to handle an enemy that keeps changing approaches." "Should we launch the final phase?" Reed asked. Wilson checked the battle data one more time. The Valari flagship was now exposed, its escort ships drawn away by the human fleet's movements. "Launch final phase," Wilson ordered. 5 ships that had been hiding behind Earth's moon now powered up their engines. These vessels carried the most powerful weapons humans had ever built, modified nuclear warheads mounted on railguns. The combination allowed the warheads to bypass shields calibrated for either conventional nuclear missiles or railgun projectiles. Vex saw the new ships. Too late. "What are those? Where did they come from?" Before his officers could respond, the human ships fired. The special warhead struck the Valari flagship directly. Its shields flickered and failed. Secondary explosions ripped through the massive ship. "We've lost engine control," an officer shouted as the bridge shook violently. "Weapons offline, shields down." For the first time in his military career, Supreme Admiral Vex felt true fear. His mighty flagship, the pride of the Valari fleet, was crippled by weapons he had once laughed at. "Order all ships to protect the flagship," he commanded. "Prepare for emergency." His words were cut off as another hit rocked the ship. The lights went out, replaced by emergency lighting. Vex knew the battle was lost. "Send the surrender signal," he said quietly. Hours later, Wilson stood in what remained of the Valari flagship's bridge. Valari crew members, now prisoners, watched as human soldiers secured the ship. Supreme Admiral Vex sat in his command chair, his proud face now showing defeat. "How?" he asked as Wilson approached. "How did your primitive species defeat our advanced technology?" Wilson looked at the alien. "Commander, we never forgot our history," he replied. "While you advanced so far that you abandoned your past, we kept learning from ours. Each generation of weapons taught us something new, and we kept that knowledge." "But your weapons were so simple," Vex said. "Simple doesn't mean ineffective," Wilson corrected. "You thought newer always meant better. That was your mistake." 2 weeks later, representatives from Earth and the Valari Confederation met to sign a peace treaty. The terms were fair but firm. The Valari would respect Earth's boundaries. They would pay for the damage they had caused, and they would begin a technology exchange program that would benefit both species. After the ceremony, Wilson stood with Dr. Miller, looking out at the stars through a large window. "Do you think they've learned their lesson?" Miller asked. "I hope so," Wilson replied. "Not just about Earth, but about technology itself. The newest isn't always the best. Sometimes the old ways still have value." Miller nodded. "That's a lesson for us too, isn't it? As we gain their technology, we shouldn't forget what got us through this war." "Exactly," Wilson agreed. "The best path forward isn't just chasing the newest thing. It's taking the best of the old and combining it with the best of the new." He looked at the stars again, thinking about the strange path that had led to this moment. The aliens had laughed at humanity's primitive weapons. Now those same aliens were studying those weapons with new respect. Sometimes, Wilson thought, being underestimated was the greatest advantage of all.